I'm Roger Hilton, and welcome to this first afternoon edition of Global Tremors. Repeated attempts to implement a ceasefire over the weekend in Ukraine to allow citizens to exit the current war zone have failed, with Russia being accused by Ukraine of violating a fragile agreement. Furthermore, intense shelling of Ukraine continues by Russian forces across the country. Live from Warsaw to give expert reaction to the ongoing conflict is Wojciech Konończuk, Deputy Director of the Center for Eastern Studies. Wojciech, welcome to Global Tremors.
Hello.
As is normally our modus operandi, everybody, we're going to start with a few news items. So very quickly, oil prices have soared to a 13-year high. Anonymous claims to have hacked Russian state TV broadcasts to show footage of the war in Ukraine. And China's Red Cross will provide humanitarian aid to Ukraine, according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi. So unfortunately, Wojciech, another brutal weekend for Ukraine and its citizens. According to experts, Russia has committed 95% of its military assets around the border to the conflict, which is producing results, albeit slowly. Ukraine resistance shows no signs of exhaustion, forcing Russian military planners to rely on more indiscriminate airstrikes. Wojciech, what is your current reading of the conflict?
Oh, well, we should assess it on a few different spheres. So first one is the Russian offensive, which is ongoing and which is continuing on all fronts, starting from the south, from the Crimea towards Zaporizhia, from the occupied part of Donbass, but all main cities like Kramatorsk, Slavyansk, or Volnovakha are still under Ukrainian control. And finally, from two directions in the north and north and east, toward Kharkiv and obviously toward Kiev. So basically, Ukrainian army is doing really well. Definitely much better than Russian expected. At the same time, from the Russian point of view, it was supposed that it would be a very quick campaign, that Ukrainian armed forces will be destroyed in just a few days. And there will be so big fear among the Ukrainian society that that they will be able to denazify Ukraine. What you should interpret, what we should explain as a regime change operation. So this initial Russian plan failed, and it seems now that it will be much longer campaign and much longer war with all the consequences also for the rest of Europe.
Wojciech, thank you so much for your opening remarks. It goes without saying that, as long as we've been into the conflict right now, it really appears as if Minister Shoigu and, the whole Kremlin leadership have underestimated Ukraine in terms of the resistance from the people and the acceptance of it. Wojciech, before we get to some of the issues on refugees, the initial forces that were sent in were supposed to be as, more of a peacekeeping operations. With 95% of the forces already deployed, there's rumors that Russia is going to be bringing people in from Syria, from Africa to bolster it. How much longer do you think Russia can sustain its current operations with its losses, and at the same time with Ukraine being supplied by Western military aid and financial aid?
Russian losses are really huge, even if this official Ukrainian number, like more than 11,000, let's say twice or even three times or four times bigger than the real losses, it's still a lot, especially if you take also losses of the Russian equipment, like tanks and aircraft, military aircraft, and so on. So basically, at the very first day of the conflict, there were like around 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers operating on the Ukrainian territory. Now there is at least 150,000. So this is much more than Russia expected to install on the ground. At the same time, what I actually learned from my colleagues who are military experts, they say that in the next couple of weeks, they will have to, the Russian will have to have some change, because the forces which are operating in Ukraine are, will have to some relax. There are some unconfirmed still information about the mercenaries, like people from the Wagner group operating in some parts of Ukraine. But I think that much more important information is information about the Rosgvardia. Rosgvardia, who, as we know, have duties on the Russian territory. So the fact that they send the Rosgvardia, especially on the southern part of Ukraine, is a sign that they are trying to install some occupying administration, because Rosgvardia are not a fighting force. It's rather like if you would like to find some parallel in history, I would compare it to NKVD. Yeah, so rather internal forces, to press the locals and to try to install some occupying administration. So I think this element we should observe carefully. Also in regards to the number of the Rosgwardia people on the Ukrainian soil.
For all of our viewers right now on Global Tremors, we're talking with Wojciech from Warsaw, who's made some great first input, sort of saying that in addition to Russia having to change its military strategy, we should also be on the lookout for sort of Russian forces that are doing occupation forces and, as you said, suppression and management of cities. Before we get to the next question, Wojciech, whether it's in Kherson or some of the other cities, it looks like this is going to be, as they say, it's not going to be a hateless occupation, and this is going to be difficult for Russia, to administer the cities. With the arrival of these Russian forces, as you mentioned in the south, what are they expecting to receive in terms of a welcome from Ukraine? Because it's not as if they're going to lay their arms down or be compliant with the new administration in these cities.
We are following Russian miscalculation on a different dimension. Definitely, they did not expect such a huge resistance from the Ukrainian society. So basically, Russian plan was very different for this operation, for this war. As I said at the very first part of this talk, they expect that the operation will take up to a few days. Now we know that it will be much, much longer. And we still don't know what will be the end of this war operation. Another thing is that they are still do not try to conquer the cities. Their only win is the fact that they take over the Kherson, which is the first capital of the Ukrainian region, take over by Russian. But at the same time, let's note that there are still a huge Ukrainian anti-Russian demonstration in the city. At the same time, we see that the new, let's say, relatively new part of the Russian strategy is to hit rockets on the Ukrainian civilian object and basically on the Ukrainian residential areas in Kharkiv and Chernigiv, in Sumy, and many others Ukrainian cities. So the basic Russian aim is to frighten Ukrainian society and to provoke the disastrous humanitarian crisis, and also to provoke as many as possible Ukraine to escape to flee the country, and also to create the humanitarian or refugee crisis for the European Union. What is already there. This is happening.
Wojciech, I'm so happy you brought up the refugee crisis. And before we get to that, I think it's a very important fact to reiterate for all of our viewers that, like you said, it seems as if very early on in the conflict, Russia's had to change their strategies from trying to take major cities, whether it's Kharkiv or Kiev, and dispute a little bit more. Over the weekend, President Zelensky announced that there's going to be a planned invasion or attack in Odessa, and the videos coming out of there that these cities are already fortifying. So it looks sort of, as Russia enters into this guerrilla warfare stage, it's only going to be bloodier and it's going to zap more resources. Wojciech, this is not new. Russia creating a refugee crisis. We've seen this before. This is out of the playbook. The reception of people in Hungary, Poland, Romania, Moldova, Slovakia has just been unbelievable to, the 1.2 or 1.3 million people who have already had to escape. What do can you comment a little bit or provide your analysis on why Russia is trying to create this refugee crisis and if it will really deter from their long-term strategy within Ukraine?
This is banal to say already, but it's the most serious refugee crisis since the end of the Second World War. Especially serious for the neighboring countries like Poland, but also Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, and Moldova, the Czech Republic also. So just yesterday, 1 million Ukrainian refugees already crossed the Polish-Ukrainian border. So Poland is the main country accepting Ukrainian refugees. So we have, let's say, altogether in total around 1.8 Ukrainian refugees already, and million plus is in Poland, but their number is growing really quickly. Just yesterday, 150,000 Ukrainian refugees crossed Polish-Ukrainian borders. So this means that we will have in next week another million Ukrainian refugees. Our assessment is that approximately 70 to 80% of them stay in Poland. So the rest goes to their relatives, friends, or, just to talk to other European countries, or just, trying to find some shelter in other European Union countries. But the problem is growing, and I have no doubt that it's one of the main Russian goals, that, to make the situation, humanitarian situation, as worse as possible. And this is the explanation of the Russian shelling of the residential areas in Ukrainian cities. At the same time, to make this refugee crisis as complicated as possible for Europe. So basically, Russian understanding of the situation, Russian provocation of the situation is that they hope that the situation will be so disastrous for both Ukrainian and the rest of Europe that they will, that we, the West and Ukrainians will beg Russian for some ceasefire, and that we will have to, especially Ukrainians, will have to accept the Russian condition to stop the crisis. Even in spite of the fact that there are still talks ongoing in both Belarus, and as we learned just in last two hours, that tomorrow there will be a meeting between Kuleba and Lavrov in Turkey, but I don't really see any positive signs that Russia can say, okay, so we are doing one step back, and we will find some, and that they will not saying any signal that they are ready to find some compromise.
But Wojciech, let me just jump in before we get to our next question. Obviously, this is not, unfortunately, the first refugee crisis that Europe has had in recent memories, given what happened in 2015. Presumably, there are some lessons learned from EU policymakers and how to do it better. Do you think maybe for one moment that while the end goal of Russia is to overwhelm and create this unbelievable humanitarian disaster, do you think that maybe Russia has overestimated the effectiveness or the favorability of this tactic, given what we've learned already? And, the efforts to not only receive and take care of the refugees is ongoing, but the supply chains of lethal aid, both defensive and military, is still ongoing. So do you think they're putting too much emphasis on this tactic to overwhelm the EU?
Yeah, I think that the Russian tactic is changing because of the initial failure of their goal. So this blitzkrieg, which was supposed to take a few days. So now I think that Russia is trying to accommodate the new situation. So the huge resistance from the Ukrainian society and the consolidation also of Ukrainian armed forces, the fact that this international legion is in the process of very quick creation. And the fact what is also very important, let's notice that in the Ukrainian statement from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry, for the first time, there was a mention about the guerrillas or partisan movement in the north part of the Sumskaya Oblast. So this is the first sign that that the guerrilla resistance is also in a form of a very quick creation. So I think it will create a lot of problems for the Russian occupying forces. But at the same time, I think this is exactly what should be expected. I'm still surprised that how many mistakes Russians are actually committed and how they miscalculated on so many that they mentioned. But basically, yes, they are accommodating to the resistance from the Ukrainian society and from the Ukrainian as a state. So basically, my understanding of their current tactic is to provoke a humanitarian crisis in big Ukrainian cities which are under siege, and we can see this polygon on the Mariupol, yes. The 400,000 Ukrainian city, which is under siege in last 4 or 5 days already, no water supply, no food supply, no electricity. So this is a classical humanitarian catastrophe for the residents. And at the same time, what I already mentioned before, that they are trying to put as many Ukrainians as possible outside Ukraine, to create the problem also for us. So, this is more and more a total war from the Russian side. The fact that at the very first day of the war, they tried to stop from shelling the civilian objects. There were some some shelling, but they were still limited. But now I see that the situation is that the war is more and more brutal, and obviously the responsibility is fully on the Russian side.
Thank you again, Wojciech, for your analysis, and for all of you joining right now on Global Tremors. We're talking with Wojciech Konończuk from Warsaw. Wojciech, just like you, I think almost every military expert, policy analyst has been surprised at and dumbfounded. I mean, legitimately dumbfounded at the amount of errors that the Russian military has made. There's a lot of theories going around that they were overconfident after Crimea and the success that they had in Syria, sort of just taking it on from distance. But it goes without saying that everybody's in agreement that the strategy will be changing. And if I'm understanding you properly, they'll just be putting more pressure on driving this humanitarian problem. Wojciech, you already mentioned it in your opening statements here, but obviously the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry and the Defense Ministry, they had announced the creation of an international foreign legion. And for all of our viewers out there, the Ukraine Foreign Ministry has provided some numbers where apparently 20,000 people from 52 countries have already volunteered to fight in Ukraine. This is still very early days. It's unclear if any of these peoples have actually been deployed. But Wojciech, what is your early take on this tactic about Ukraine sort of crowdsourcing this personnel? And do you think that it might actually make a difference on the battlefield? Because, you know, there was a great report that came out on March 3rd from the Brookings, and it seems as if it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of if this is a good tactic or not. So, I mean, like I said, do you think this is a game changer for Ukraine? And then the follow-up question is, what is going through the mind of Russian policymakers, seeing that now you've had 20,000 additional troops from 52 other countries entering the battle space?
Yeah, so there's a few questions actually, what you already said. I think that this war say us a lot about the effectiveness of Ukrainian state. And, you know, myself, I usually was on a rather poor opinion about the effectiveness of the Ukrainian state administration. Now, in last 10 or so days, they're doing very well. You know, the fact that the defense ministry has started so quickly creation of this international legion, and their information policy is just, you know, it's just a masterpiece. I think it will be a chapter in a book about art of war, which will be written in the future. The fact that Zelensky is so in some effective way able to communicate with his own society, but also with the outside world, and that his messages are directed not only to Ukrainians. This is obvious that they are the most important in his communication, but at the same time that he's able to influence also Western public opinion, not only Western elites. But I think that big part of his messages are directed to the Western societies. So, you know, this is really impressive. Another thing is this international legion, which is, as I said, it was announced by the defense ministry in the 4th day of war that they are starting creation of this international legion. We already see some videos that there are some members of this international legion on the ground. They are, you know, taking part in the battle. Probably at this stage there is a few tens of them, but I think the number will be growing. So, you know, Russia is losing this information war. There's no any doubt about that. They are not able to respond anyhow on the very effective Ukrainian campaign. But, you know, this another sign that there is a huge consolidation of Ukrainian society. And, you know, I would like to pay your attention not only on President Zelensky, and level of support for him is already 93%, which is huge. But also, I think that very good job are doing both Minister Kuleba and Minister Reznikov. So, you know, there's a team of really a few effective people in Ukrainian government now, and the fact that they are able to, you know, communicate it and put the constant pressure on us here in European Union and also other Western countries is really impressive.
Wojciech, there's no doubt that we've talked a lot at length on this about, the effectiveness of President Zelensky as a strategic communicator. And that's a great point that you point out, that his message isn't just resonating with elites, but with the general public. I mean, the average person across Europe, Canada, North America, they all are really accepting his message. And what's even more impressive about his strategic communications and that of the entire government, which you said you weren't so impressed with at the beginning, was the attractiveness of the message for foreigners to come to Ukraine and defend, where the interviews you've seen are people who have masked their faces and commented, they really believe that this is something they need to do, that this is a battle between good and evil. And that really speaks volumes to how effective the messaging has been. And it goes without saying, I mean, I think we both look forward to that chapter on the updated version of Art of War when it comes to strategic communications. So Wojciech, we've talked about it from the Ukrainian perspective, but what does this mean for Russia? I mean, if you're sitting here, if you're Minister Shoigu or Gerasimov, and you're saying, wow, we have 20,000 new troops coming in from 52 different countries, they're not Ukrainians. Does this change the calculus at all, or do they continue on the same path of just indiscriminately bombing civilian infrastructure?
Before I answer this question, let me just say a few words about what I forgot in the previous parts. There is not only a huge consolidation among Ukrainians, but also let's notice that there are no collaborators, which is a very different situation than what we have in 2014, when we have collaborators in Donbas region, in many Ukrainian cities. No collaborators now. So it's also a sign about how much Ukraine has changed in the last 8 years. But my understanding is that Russians still perceive Ukraine as the same country as it was 8 years ago. This is another Putin's miscalculation. And I said Putin because I'm pretty sure that the Russian Secret Service, the reading of the situation on the ground in Ukraine and the fact that Ukrainian society is changing so quickly in last years is probably very relative. I cannot imagine that this is a Russian secret service who are misinformed their leadership, but probably the information Putin is receiving on his table are to some extent, let's say they're putting on his table what he wants to read. If you open any like a textbook about this miscalculation in the world history, about the leadership miscalculation in the world history, I think Putin is now writing another chapter to this textbook. Okay, but coming back to your question about the Russian future strategy, unfortunately, I don't see any signs that Russia is able to say that it's our failure and that we want to find some common ground with Ukrainians and the West. No, if you look what is going on in Russia domestically, this an attempt from the Kremlin to consolidate society around the Kremlin, the law changes in last days, the fact that now if you are taking part in the anti-war protest, you can go to jail for 6 years. This new law about the fakes on the Russian army to jail on Facebook, Twitter, and that they are trying to make the Russian internet even more sovereign than it was, is the fact that the Russian regime is more and more similar to this military dictatorship with unfortunately growing element of dictatorship. So the fact that they are doing what they are doing with their own society is another sign for me that they are preparing for a longer war. From the very beginning of this war, it was clear that it's not only a war about the future of Ukraine, and that is not only a war about the international order in Europe, but it's also a war about Putin's future. And perhaps it's the most dangerous element in the whole situation.
No, Wojciech, I couldn't agree with you. I mean, obviously, all of the draconian rules that the Duma has had to implement, and all of the companies walking away. If I read it correctly, there was 4,300 arrests alone over the weekend. So it goes without saying that I think the Russian jails across the country are going to be swelling for a while. And like you said, I mean, whether if you go out there to protest, whether you're there by accident, all of those Russians who are there are really putting themselves on the line, facing between 6 and 15 years of jail time. And maybe something that we've underestimated in the West is the level of repression that President Putin is willing to go through. But for everybody joining us on Global Terms, that's a great point, Wojciech, that sort of you see a clear indication in the way the domestic situation is being run right now for Putin and the regime survival, that they might be planning for a longer war instead of this quick decapitation strategy to take over the country. Speaking about countries who have really stepped up and have just done an unbelievable job in the face of this is your native Poland. It is very clear, in a very short time, that Poland has emerged as the linchpin of Western strategy to support Ukraine militarily, and as well as playing a huge role on the humanitarian side. So Wojciech, as we enter sort of the last 5 or 6 minutes of our conversation, are you surprised, or what is your reading of sort of the current government stepping up the way it has? And then my last question to you is, do you think that Poland in the long term can sustain this enthusiasm, given the huge refugee numbers and some of the other massive military, the massive financial situations that come with receiving all of these refugees?
Yeah, very good questions. Let's remember that Polish-Ukrainian relations always have the strategic importance for both sides, even in spite of the fact that we often have some fight about our understanding of history, but now it's not important anymore. I think that due to the specificity of our relations with Kiev, but also our geographical location, Poland's role in this war is to some extent crucial. It's crucial because we are, as we already discussed, we are accepting the growing number of Ukrainian refugees. But also we are the main channel to supply humanitarian assistance to Ukraine, but also military equipment to Ukraine. With the special focus on the airport in Rzeszów, this the biggest Polish city close to the Ukrainian border, with the big airport. So if you check flight radar, you will notice that there's tens of military aircrafts landing every day in Rzeszów, with some equipment on board, obviously, also humanitarian equipment. Your question about at this stage, I think, being critical and trying to see all the things in realistic terms. I think that both Polish government and Polish society, I would rather say Polish society and Polish government, are doing really, really well. We expected Ukrainian refugees. 2 or 3 weeks before the war, Polish Prime Minister visited Kiev, and then he said that if there will be any emergency, the door to Poland will be open for Ukrainians. So basically, some of Polish institutes, public institutes, they were preparing for the worst. Even if I think many of us didn't believe that the worst can happen. But unfortunately, as we can see in last days, the worst, the nightmare scenario is actually happening now. So your question about the moods and from the both Polish society and Polish government in the next weeks and probably months to come, I think is very important, because any refugee crisis and any response on the refugee crisis is always a marathon rather than a sprint. So there is a huge enthusiasm, and I think it's a surprise for many of us here in Poland also, about how much Poles are trying to help to the refugees. Let's remember that we don't have refugee camps in Poland, because hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees, receive shelters in Polish homes. I can tell you from my friends and relatives here in Warsaw that majority of them already accepted people from Ukraine they know, or people from Ukraine they do not know before that. But with 1 million we are doing well. But when there will be in a few weeks 3 or 4 or more Ukrainian refugees here, I think it will be really, really huge challenge for the whole country, but also for the whole European Union. And there's another question about this Polish military aircrafts. As you know, there's a discussion also in the media about the possible delivering from Poland our MiG-29s to Ukraine. I think that the discussion are now on a technical level. That there is my understanding, what I read from the public statements, is that there is a political acceptance for that, but there are some important technical details still to negotiate.
Well, Wojciech, thank you so much for all of this input. I mean, I think, like you said, I mean, even with the visit to Ukraine by the Polish Prime Minister, the scale of the crisis has caught everybody off guard. And like you said, I think your assessment is very realistic that in the short term, for the moment, enthusiasm is high. People have opened up their hearts, their wallets, and their homes to strangers and people they know. But long term, Poland themselves is not going to be able to take on 3-4 million refugees, where they're already stretched to the limit with 1 million. So let's just hope that there are lessons learned from the EU about supporting Poland and Hungary, Slovakia, Romania, about helping out those refugees. Wojciech, as we sign off here, do you have any final remarks or something, whether it's on the social side or on the battlefield, that our viewers should be looking for, should be on the lookout for tomorrow, 2 days, or a week from now?
Basically, I think that my last comment should be that I don't see, unfortunately, optimistic scenario for the next couple of days and weeks. I see only pessimistic scenarios. I don't really believe that Putin will make any compromise or any 1 or 2 step back. So let's prepare for the worst.
Well, on that very somber note, Wojciech, thank you so much for joining us and for your outstanding input.
Thank you for the invitation.
I look forward to having you back on again. And I think, as we said, Warsaw and Poland in general will continue to be a very important part of this strategy. For all of our viewers on Global Tremors, we will be back in 90 minutes at 3 p.m. with Kurai Kose, Senior Director, Analyst, Supply Chain Research and Advisor at Gartner, to talk about Ukraine's supply chains and critical infrastructure. So for everybody, thank you so much, Wojciech, and have a nice day. And we'll see everybody in 90 minutes.
Thanks. Thank you, Roger.